Hello, it's Delia here. And today I wanted to jump on here and talk a little bit about ancestry and the ancestors, that whole concept. Over the years, I've done over 5,000 past life readings, and I've learned a number of things from observing all of that. And one of them is that a way to think about your ancestry is there's your biological ancestry, your grandmother's, your mother's mother, your father's mother, grandparents, and you know the kind of ancestry you get on 23andMe and that kind of thing. Or no, that's your DNA. So anyway, it's ancestry like in a family tree. So when you have your biological ancestry, you can trace things back to multiple generations of this or that, biological traits or emotional traits. It's really useful, like in recovery, in addiction recovery. There's a school of thought that finds it useful to go back and see who was an alcoholic, for instance, and how that sometimes skips a generation, but the psychological effects of alcoholism affect everybody in the family. So you can you can look upstream and see resonance and sources of coping patterns, we'll say. So there's that kind of ancestry and that kind of following your line that way. And that's the way it's mostly spoken of. It's the most common definition of ancestry that we have, which is biological. Okay. So, and it has something to offer. It's great information if you're interested in that kind of thing. You want to always follow what's interesting to you because that's going to have information that's pertinent for you. So another kind of ancestry that I've discovered is what I call your spiritual ancestry. So you've had lots of lifetimes. You are an infinite being, and by infinite being I mean non-physical. And so when I say spirit or spiritual, I'm talking about not having a physical presentation or before physical, as opposed to a hierarchical, religious kind of spiritual or New Age kind of spiritual perspective. That's not what I mean by spiritual. What I mean by spiritual is that infinite, non-physical, non-corporeal aspect. So as an infinite being, consciousness, energy, you've had lots and lots of lifetimes, and you've been in every kind of body, and you have been the best of the best and the worst of the worst and everything in between. You've been, a king and a beggar and a thief and a priest and a priestess and a holy woman and a holy man. You've been everything under the sun. You've been a regular Joe. You've been a bad guy. You've been a wife and a child and everything you can imagine. Every definition, every little name or role that we can think of, you have been it at one time or another. Sometimes there are themes and you've been doing things a lot. So that's your spiritual heritage, and it's just as numerous, you could say, as your biological heritage. There's as much of it as there is your biological heritage. And your spiritual heritage has a lot to offer. It has both of the physical and the spiritual heritages have a lot to offer, but they're kind of gunked up with judgments, conclusions, decisions, projections, and definitions from this lifetime and from others. So if you are in a lifetime right now where you have really strong religious beliefs, well, you're probably not watching this. And if you may have really decided opinions about reincarnation. And if you have really decided opinions about reincarnation, then as though it doesn't exist. And it does exist in pretty much all the major religions in some form. But let's say a person has a really strong belief that says that you don't have past lives, you just have this life. Then that's going to be like a filter through which you see everything. Make sense? So if you have a belief that says that you are an O'Toole, your family tribal thing, you're an O'Toole, and O'Toole's never ... or O'Toole's always ... And it's a really strongly held belief because your identity is involved in it, and you're really engaged with being an O'Toole and what does that mean to you, and it has a lot of meaning and a lot of stories, and every time the O'Tooles get together, we tell these stories over and over again, and everybody has a piece of it, and everybody participates in this mythology or this story of the O'Tooles, right? Well, when you have such strong beliefs, and repetition is a sign of a belief, then you're gonna have to see everything through that filter, because you have this really strong belief and you're devoted to it and you are loyal to it and you have pledged yourself to it, even if you haven't used those words, by the repetition in the gatherings and the way you identify with it. So you're really invested in these stories and these values, this way of being, this way of looking at the world. And so when you look at the world, it's always going to be through these stories of being an O'Toole and what that means to you. So when you're being an O'Toole that way and it's really serving you and it's making you happy and bringing you, and you're having all the internally, not externally, you're having all of the joy of being an O'Toole and none of the, oh, but I should, or I self-doubt and self-correcting to be in line with the group. If that's the case, then, that's great. However, often when I read people, if they're that much of an O'Toole, they're that much not themselves. And so they've kind of like put their identity in the O'Toole clan, but not in their individual being. In fact, the O'Toole clan probably has stories about how being an individual being detracts from the clan or costs the clan or is disloyal to the clan, that kind of thing. So making it that being yourself, being your own autonomous self, is a little shady or a little suspect or a little bad and wrong. Or somehow discounting and invalidating the one for the glory of the group, that kind of thing. So I grew up in an Irish Catholic family, so I know this really well from the inside out. And as long as you're, one of the family, then we all know the same things. We all have the same stories. We all have the same past, even if that's not true. And so I had a lot of trouble with that, especially after when I was in my 20s, I had a very traumatic event that I just I just didn't fit in anywhere. Uh, there was I went to a party and there was bad guys came in with guns and raped me and a couple other people. And it was just a very um, traumatic event. And the people in my family didn't know how to handle this. The group, the story, didn't have a way to contain or hold that particular event, because that event doesn't exist in the story, right? And so the only story that existed about rape was that you must have done something, you must have deserved it, you must have done something to bring it on, that kind of invalidating story. And so it was a break in the fabric, right? And up until that point in my life, I always went to family events, and I knew everybody's business. I was all about being the story and supporting the story, and it was very much my identity was in the clan. And then when that happened, through just how it broke my timeline, let's say, I couldn't invest there anymore. I didn't fit in there anymore because I didn't fit into the story. There was no part of the story that would include me, except as this, if it happened to you, you must have deserved it somehow. And because it was a very traditional kind of story that my family was in. And so this set me on a different course. I was on a different course anyway, but that event and how I internalized it because of the story of the family and what it meant about me, then I went off on a different direction. But I was a sport anyway. A sport is I think it's in chemistry. It's something that doesn't fit in. And so I didn't fit into the story anyway. The story never did accommodate girls and women. So except, little thing, the ownership kind of energy, which I was always uncomfortable with. So I went off on my own way, but the break with the family was always hard because I had that very strong biological ancestry lineage as a value in the family, and that I had as well. So to leave the biological lineage, which is what it felt like to me, was another layer of like trauma, right? And the way I navigated all of that brought me into worlds of things that really mattered to me and that were fascinating to me, that I didn't have to bring any of them along. That was not even part of the deal, right? Because of this break. So in the course of my following the energy and being interested in what I was interested in, I did discover a lot of my own psychic abilities, what we call psychic abilities, and developing them. And I got trained at them. I went to schools. I went to an institute that helps you get to a nice, wonderful, contained place where a lot of people are there to learn about reading energy and reading pictures, energetic pictures, clairvoyance. And so that's what we did. And there was a lot of us, and that's always a good thing for learning, is when there's many people doing it, because many people have many different points of view and perspectives. And so you really get a well-rounded perspective and education. So in the Institute, I was trained at doing these readings, especially one of my specialties was the past life. And it's the stories of, you could say it's the stories of who we've been and how what roles we have played and what roles we had trouble with. Because the stories that have any kind of a stick to them, they're sticky, or they're cloying, they won't go away, or difficulties that arise, the same thing over and over, different people, different faces, but same thing is happening over and over again. These are often from, or the origin of these is often in a past life or multiple past lives. And so being able to understand that what you're going through today is not just something. It's connected to a bunch of things. And if you've watched some other videos, you may have seen the one about Get Bigger. If you're only looking at what's going on and you're trying to analyze it, given the methodology and the processes of thinking that the regular world provides, with the regular world that I call the Time Warner version of the world, it's very narrow. It's a lot like how I didn't fit into my family's story. It's very narrow, and it doesn't actually accommodate everybody, and it creates others, and by others I mean foreigners. It makes the way the story is told, a cultural story is told, it creates division. So the story that you might be trying to work within might not be big enough. And if your story doesn't include bigger than your clan and or bigger than the Time Warner version of the world, your story is not big enough, because you are an infinite being and you've had lots and lots of lifetimes. And so when you try to make that vastness fit into a very small container, you're cutting off lots and lots and lots of information and perspective and knowingness. And that, a symptom of that is to self-doubt and to feel bad or wrong about yourself, or like you're unredeemable. And those are symptoms of your story. Your container is not big enough, because the story of you has to include the beyond. It has to include more than what the Time Warner version of the world says we are. Because the way I describe it a lot for clients is looking for a prop. But let's say this small space, this small band, this is the width that you're supposed to have. And inside of here, you're your body, and you're your car, and you're your job, and your relationship status, and your Facebook presence, or basically what can be seen by a camera, right? So, and the reason is that it has to be what somebody else says you are. So it's what you are from an outsider's perspective, right? That's what I mean by what a camera sees. And so and we're never, nobody ever says this, but really that's the bandwidth that we're allowed. And all of the stuff that we are that's outside of that bandwidth, which is a lot, gets a suspicious eye. Like I was saying in my family, or in the family stories, like in the O'Toole's, if it's outside of the story, then it either falls flat or has no following or has no, it's annihilated in a way. It's just not recognized. And so that's what happens here with this story of us. And most of how we operate is outside of this. It's like this way, right? So if you're operating at this much, but the story of you is only this much, then every time you're outside of that small band, you're breaking the rules, you're breaking the law, you might be crazy, you might need to be controlled. It's going to have a furtive or dangerous or not right kind of feeling for the body because it's out of what's allowed in the story. And most of us are outside of what's allowed in the story. So doing the thousands of past life readings that I've done, well, there's a few themes that have come through. One is that there are many, 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 many more cultures and civilizations and societies than we're told there are, or that we're told that there were, and told that there are. The way this history is written, it's a common thing to know that history is written by the conquerors. And so they have control of the story. And anything that's outside of the story is considered suspect or annihilated or bastardized to fit into the story. So here we are in a period of civilization where we are, pardon me, allergies, where we're very aware of the effects of colonialism in cultures. And we're in the process of decolonizing how we think about each other and ourselves and the planet and how we operate businesses and that kind of thing, and governments. So the colonialism is like this, is like the story of the O'Toole's. You fit in with us, or you're not with us. We cast you out, or we make you bad and wrong. So anything that's foreign is other. And anything that's other is suspect. So there's always pressure inside the story to fit in. Because as social beings, if you're not fitting in, if you get pushed out, then you're, it's a death, a social death to be cast out. Banishment is a horrible thing. At least, that's the story, right? I was kind of banished by what happened, or I self-banished, and it was a wonderful thing. It stood me in good stead for a long time. When you follow your past lives, when you follow that story, when you look at your past life heritage, your spiritual heritage, you get there's energy that doesn't want me to tell this. You get awareness of how expansive and big possibilities are. And you also get the visceral experience of how vast you are and how much you are not the story of you, and you are not even this body's identity. You really get help. It really helps to get you grounded in how you are not what somebody else sees. You're not your job. You're not your car. You're not your finances. You're not who your father says you are. You're not who your mother says you are. You're not even who you say you are. You're actually much bigger than that. And being aware of your this past life energy helps make that real for the body, that you're not just right here and now, and that you have vast resources of you-ness that isn't in the story. As an infinite being, you're connected to everything that's ever been, but not through the story. The story is great for social camaraderie and social connections, which are important for the body personality. But after a point, there comes a time when you no longer can tolerate choosing between belonging to the group or being true to yourself. The wonderful Shakespeare quote in Hamlet about to thine own self be true, and as it follows day or night, something else about how if you are true to you, you cannot be untrue to anyone because it's too expensive to you. So it's not a moral judgment that says that you have to be truthful and honest. It's an inner nature kind of thing. Because you're choosing to be true to you, then you would not choose to be false to anyone, as Shakespeare would say. So the more you choose you, the more you become that infinite aspect of you. And what happens is you kind of migrate your identity, the way you identify yourself, away from the Time Warner version of the world, that very narrow thing, and you start to identify as your infinite self, because that's less and less a concept and more viscerally true in your body and how you operate. So there's a tremendous freedom. And in that, and with that, a lot of joy, because you're not being held back and held down. One of the earliest poems that I wrote, I was probably 12, and it was about those strands, those pulls of those strings that want to pull you back and pull you down, related to family and belonging and your family identity and your place in the family and who you are in your society, your place in the society. And the more your identity is occupied with others and how you fit in with others and how they perceive you, then you are bereft when you're not with them, when you're not able to physically see your reality of this is who I am in relation to these people. And then all of your well-being is attached to other people. The more you're aware of being an infinite being, you can love and be around all of those people. And on the surface, maybe nothing has changed, but you're not bound to them. You choose to be there instead of being bound to them. So you see the difference. If you're choosing to be with them, then you're free to come and go, and your safety is within you. But if you're bound to them, then your well-being is hitched to their star. And so you're never in charge of it. You're never in control of it. They are. And they may or may not be like doing that to you. It could be that you're doing that to you. And so, again, the more you're aware of being an infinite being and removing the stickiness to the story so that you get to be in choice instead of having to, you get to instead of have to, then there's more freedom. And then there's more freedom, there's more energy, there's more life force energy, and there's a lot more fun, and there's a lot more mobility and possibilities. So the more you're aware of being more than that little narrow band, and the more you practice different modes of consciousness, conscious awareness, and tools to get you in touch with who you truly be, as well as cast off what you're not, then the more you can thrive and the more you can love who you love with no threat of what they think of you. You don't have to bend and fold and mutilate yourself all the time to get them to like you, because you're the source of your freedom and vitality and joy, as opposed to them being the source of it. So that's just a little bit about things that I've learned around past lives and being an infinite being with a body. So thanks for joining in today. If you have any questions, just let me know. All right, thanks. See you later.